All right, let's jump into some fascinating stuff today. We're going to be looking at a conversation between Jay Weidner, who you might know as a filmmaker, and a physicist named Dan Winter.
Right.
It's hosted by a guy named Dave, and there's another person there named Reel. This is really more like a kind of a free-flowing brainstorm session than a formal discussion or anything like that.
Okay, interesting.
And we're going to try to decode some of these ideas that come up because they get pretty dense, but also really intriguing. I mean, they're talking about lucid dreaming, reality creation,
Oh, wow.
even immortality. So let's see what we can pull out of this conversation.
I was fascinating to see those kinds of ideas kind of blend together, like physics and spirituality.
Right, exactly. So they start out with this story about a friend of Jay's, and this friend is apparently very wealthy and claims that he lucid dreams his reality into existence. Like he can actually consciously shape his world through his dreams.
Well, that's a bold claim.
Right. I mean, that's a big idea. And this actually ties into Dan Winter's work. He's done a lot of research on how thoughts can influence reality.
Yeah, he's got some pretty interesting theories about that.
So how would thoughts actually do that? Like what's the mechanism there?
He uses the analogy of plasma.
Mm-hmm.
So plasma is like this state of matter where energy and information are kind of inseparable.
Okay.
And he's suggesting that our thoughts, which are a form of energy, could actually have a shaping effect on the world around us, just like plasma can.
That's a true thought, isn't it?
It is.
But what I thought was even more interesting is that they also talk about how important it is to like lose a dream, like to let go of specific outcomes.
Right, almost like detachment.
Yeah. They even mentioned Neil Yurka, the founder of Corporate Express, who apparently said that he lucid dreamed the company's stock value.
Wow.
Now, wouldn't it have been better for him to hold on to that dream if he actually had that power?
That's a good question. And Winter argues that by detaching from those specific outcomes, like in our dreams, we actually open ourselves up to a wider range of possibilities in real life.
Oh, I see. So it's kind of like by letting go of that one specific vision, we're actually allowing something greater to potentially come in.
Yeah, exactly. It's a different way of thinking about intention and manifestation.
Definitely. And then later on, they talk about Aboriginal cultures and how they place so much emphasis on experiencing bliss.
Right.
Not just like a fleeting feeling, but like a fundamental state of being.
Yeah, like a way of life almost.
And they connect this bliss to immortality. So how does that all tie together?
Well, that's where Dan Winter brings in this idea of longitudinal coherence.
Okay.
And so you can think of it as like when your energy is aligned and harmonious within your body, within your mind, you achieve this heightened state of coherence. And he believes that coherence could be the key to unlocking our full potential, including potentially a longer or even unlimited lifespan.
So it's not just about feeling happy, it's like tapping into some deeper energetic state.
Right, almost like an inner alignment or attunement.
And that unlocks these hidden abilities or potentials within us.
Yeah, that's the idea.
And they even talk about how it's frustrating that these kinds of ideas aren't being taught in schools.
Mm-hmm.
They mentioned Tom Bearden, who was a physicist, and he apparently felt the same way about these concepts being overlooked.
Right, like there's this whole realm of knowledge and exploration that's kind of missing from mainstream education.
Exactly. But okay, let's get into some even more mind-bending stuff. They start talking about entanglement, phase conjugation, and the nature of time. And this is where things start to get really weird.
Yeah, they really dive deep into the physics here.
Yeah, so they start with the idea of action at a distance, which is this phenomenon where particles can influence each other instantly, even if they're separated by huge distances.
Right, like they're connected somehow beyond space and time.
Right. And they connect this to entanglement, which is this, this spooky connection that Einstein was so skeptical of.
Yeah.
But then they go even further and link it to wormholes, which are those theoretical tunnels through space-time.
Right, like shortcuts through the fabric of reality.
And to phase conjugation, which I have to admit I'm not entirely sure I understand.
So imagine like a wave of energy moving in one direction.
Mm.
Now, picture that wave being flipped, reversed in time, so it creates a mirror image of itself. And this mirror image can then cancel out the original wave.
Oh, okay.
And that's essentially what phase conjugation is. And what's really crazy is that Dan Winter links this concept to gravity. He argues that the golden ratio, which you find everywhere in nature, is actually key to understanding how this repeating pattern, we call it fractality, actually causes gravity.
So gravity is a result of waves canceling each other out. I need to think about that one for a minute.
It is a pretty mind-bending idea.
And then they go on to talk about orthogonal time, which is basically the idea that time isn't just this straight line from past to future, but that it has multiple dimensions.
Right, like time is more complex than we usually perceive it.
And they believe that intense emotions, like peak emotional states, act like contact points in this multidimensional time, leaving these anchor points in space-time.
So our feelings are actually creating ripples in time.
That's what they seem to be suggesting.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah, it's a lot to process. And there's so much more we haven't even touched on yet. We got to talk about the Holy Grail and goosebumps and even the return of an ancient Sumerian god. So are you ready for part 2 of this wild ride?
Absolutely, bring it on. Yeah, let's do it. I'm particularly curious about that whole Holy Grail connection. How does that even come up in a conversation about physics?
Well, they're basically drawing an analogy between the Holy Grail and the way waves are arranged within something called a phase conjugate dielectric.
Okay, so that sounds pretty complicated. What exactly is a dielectric?
Well, it's basically a material that doesn't conduct electricity very well, like rubber or glass, for example. It can store electrical energy, though.
Right. And then phase conjugate, if I'm remembering right, that refers to that whole wave reversal thing we talked about earlier.
Exactly.
Okay, so they're saying that when you have this specific arrangement of waves within this dielectric material, it creates this pattern that resembles the Holy Grail.
Yeah, that's the basic idea. They also bring in the shape of the letter L, which they see as representing a shift in the timing of these waves. Physicists call it a phase shift.
Okay, so what's the significance of the L shape?
They link this L shape created by the phase shift between two types of waves to the term Elohim, which is often interpreted as referring to, God or divine beings.
Right.
So it's like they're suggesting that this fundamental pattern of wave interactions is somehow connected to the concept of the divine.
Wow, that's a pretty big leap, isn't it? Going from like the Holy Grail to wave patterns to God.
It is. But, this whole conversation is really about exploring those less traveled paths of thought.
Right. Pushing the boundaries of it.
Yeah. And it gets even weirder. They also talk about the concept of the Anu, which they describe as both the heart of the sun and the heart of a human.
Okay, I'm definitely sensing a theme here. They're blending physics and spirituality in some pretty unexpected ways.
They are, for sure. But let's shift gears for a second and talk about something a little more down to earth. That tingling feeling you get when you hear a beautiful piece of music or you experience a moment of awe? Most bumps?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
So most people would just dismiss that as a simple physical response, but Dan Winter actually sees it as evidence of something he calls shareable waves.
Shareable waves?
Yeah, these are waves of energy and information that connect us to this vast network of ancestral memory and survival instincts.
So like our ancestors are sending us messages through goosebumps.
It kind of sounds crazy, but yeah, that's what he seems to be suggesting.
Like we're tapping into some kind of collective unconscious.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A reservoir of knowledge and experience passed down through generations.
That's fascinating. And they connect this to Gurger, who talked about the sacred gymnastic and how certain spiritual practices can induce these tingling sensations, particularly in the little finger.
Right. So it's not just a random physiological thing. It's connected to something deeper.
Yeah, there's a meaning there.
And speaking of connecting to something bigger than ourselves, they also have some really interesting things to say about being a generalist. Someone who's interested in a lot of different things.
Right. Not just specializing in one specific field.
Exactly. And in a world that's always pushing us to specialize, they actually celebrate the power of being a generalist. They challenge this idea that you have to narrow your focus to be successful.
Okay.
Instead, they suggest that exploring a wide range of concepts and ideas could actually lead to a more profound understanding of the world and our place in it.
That's an interesting perspective. It's kind of like the more diverse your knowledge is, the better equipped you are to make connections and see the bigger picture.
Yeah, exactly. And they even link this to the concept of immortality, suggesting that this continuous exploration of different fields could be a key to living longer.
Wow. So stay curious, keep learning new things, and you might just live forever.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
But okay, now we're moving into territory that might raise a few eyebrows. They start talking about sulfur and its association with UFO sightings.
Okay, they should be good.
They even reference a French government document that mentions the smell of sulfur in connection with these encounters.
Hmm.
And they bring in some esoteric literature here, too. They talk about Manly P. Hall's book, Secret Teachings of All Ages, which delves into all these different mystical and philosophical traditions.
Right.
And they suggest a link between sulfur and Lucifer. They interpret Lucifer's eye as a phase conjugate crystal.
Lucifer's eye as a crystal.
Yeah, they're referring to the specific arrangement of energy that they believe Lucifer's eye represents and connecting it to that whole concept of phase conjugation we talked about earlier.
Right, that wave reversal thing.
Exactly. And they even draw a connection to the Kaaba stone, which is the sacred object in Islam.
The Kaaba stone.
Yeah, suggesting that it might also embody this principle of phase conjugation.
So they're seeing a connection between this ancient symbol and this advanced physics concept.
Yeah, it's like they're suggesting that there's this hidden scientific principle at play in all these ancient stories and symbols.
That's a pretty interesting interpretation.
And then they go even further and say that Enki, who's this deity from Sumerian mythology, is returning to Earth.
Enki.
Yeah, he's often associated with, wisdom and knowledge.
Okay.
And they propose that Enki might actually be another name for Lucifer, and that another Sumerian deity, Enlil, could be Yahweh.
Whoa, they're really going for it here.
I know, right? And they connect all of this to Thoth, the Egyptian god of writing, Thor, the Norse god of thunder, and even the lineage of King Tut.
So they're basically weaving together all these different strands of mythology and speculation.
They are, but they're essentially suggesting that these figures might represent different aspects of the same archetype or force, and that this force is somehow involved in shaping the course of human history.
That's a lot to unpack. And I can see how some people might find these ideas a bit out there.
Definitely. But remember, we're just exploring the conversation here. We're not endorsing any particular viewpoint.
Right. It's all about exploring the ideas.
Exactly. But before we get too lost in the realm of mythology, let's move on to their thoughts on the future. They actually end on a surprisingly optimistic note.
Oh, it's good to hear. After all that heavy stuff, a little optimism is welcome.
It is refreshing to hear a bit of optimism after going through all those intense ideas. So what did they say about the future?
Well, they really emphasize that the future isn't fixed,
Okay.
It's something that we are actively creating through our thoughts and our actions. And they seem really excited about the power of meditation and spiritual practices to positively influence, the world around us.
So they're suggesting that our internal state can actually have an effect on the collective reality.
Yeah, that's kind of the gist of it, that we're not just, passive observers, but we're actually active participants in shaping the course of events.
Oh.
And they believe that, by cultivating inner awareness and practicing things like meditation, we can actually help to reinvigorate the world, as they put it.
I like that. Reinvigorate the world. That's a nice, hopeful way to put it. But they did mention some concerns, right? Something about a dark group.
Yeah, they did express a bit of caution, suggesting that there are, forces at play that might not have our best interests at heart. They didn't go into a whole lot of detail about it.
Yeah. But
they alluded to a group that seems to be pushing for some kind of global collapse.
Oh, that's a little unsettling, especially after all that talk about the power of positive intention, Makes you wonder if there's like a kind of a battle going on between these different forces.
It's an interesting thought for sure. This idea of a tug of war between forces that want to create and forces that want to destroy.
Yeah.
But ultimately, they seem to believe that we have the power to choose which side we align with.
I mean, I think that's a good takeaway from all of this. Well, this deep dive has given me a lot to think about, that's for sure.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground. It's pretty amazing how all these different ideas, from the science of lucid dreaming to ancient myths, esoteric symbolism, even the future, how it all kind of comes together.
Yeah.
It's a testament to how interconnected knowledge really is and how seemingly disparate ideas can weave together to create this more holistic picture of reality.
Exactly, exactly. And for those who are intrigued and want to learn more, Jay Widener and Dan Winter actually shared their contact information.
Oh, great.
You can find Jay's films at sacredmysteries.com and Gaia.com and check out his YouTube show Reality Check.
Okay.
And Dan's work is available on his YouTube channel, Dan Winter Fractal Field, and websites like fractalfield.com and flameandmind.com.
That's great. So much to explore.
I know, right? So as we wrap up this episode, I'm curious if reality is really as malleable as they suggest. What small shift could you make in your thoughts or actions, today to help shape a more positive future? Let us know in the comments. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.